10-5, I'm hit multiple times. Said meds.
On the night of June 11, 2025, a 47-second video shook the United States. Filmed secretly from the shadows of the solitary confinement wing at USP Allenwood, the footage showed Sean Diddy Combs being escorted by 2 correctional officers. His hands were cuffed. His uniform hung wrinkled and dirty. Blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. His face was swollen. His eyes were vacant. Once a cultural icon and architect of multi-million-dollar music empires, he was now inmate, 8752-302X. Dragged, away like a forgotten convict. The charisma, power, and celebrity were gone, swallowed by silence and steel. On June 7th, just hours after the guilty verdict, Diddy was transferred under armed federal escort to USP Allenwood, a maximum security federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. Known for housing sex offenders, white-collar criminals, and former military inmates, Allenwood is not a place for fallen stars. It's a place for dangerous men and forgotten names. The intake was documented in a confidential report by Lieutenant Manuel Reyes, a decorated Iraq War veteran now assigned to manage high-profile admissions. Diddy arrived at precisely 3:18 a.m., accompanied by 3 federal agents and a forensic physician. From the moment he stepped out of the transport van, he didn't utter a single word. Reyes described his demeanor as unnerving. His eyes didn't. "Just look at you," the lieutenant wrote. "They looked through you." When instructed to remove all clothing for inspection, Diddy obeyed silently. His expression never changed. According to a psychological analysis conducted shortly after, his behavior aligned with a condition known as reality denial syndrome, typically seen in people who once held immense power but experienced an abrupt, irreversible collapse. After decontamination, medical screening, and a forced haircut, Diddy's personal items were recorded: a gold chain engraved with the word Shah, 2 black notebooks filled with handwritten notes, and a nearly empty bottle of Creed Aventus cologne. These were sealed and stored. Diddy was then escorted to Isolation Unit 5B. Because of the high-profile nature of his case and the details surrounding his conviction, the warden personally ordered protective custody protocol. In the official file, Warden Claudine Mercer noted, "This inmate is at immediate risk of attack due to the nature of his crimes and his notoriety. Maximum protection protocol is required." Within prison walls, this classification falls under the PCU, Protective Custody Unit, reserved for inmates at high risk of targeted violence, sex offenders, informants, and public figures. Diddy's cell measured just 6 feet by 6 feet. The walls were bare cement. A metal bed was bolted to the floor beside a lidless toilet and a leaky sink. The only window was a thin slit that let in barely enough light to cast a shadow. Surveillance footage from that first day showed him sitting on the bed, unmoving, for over 9 hours. He ignored his food tray. He didn't react when a nurse checked his blood pressure. He said nothing. Medical staff logged signs of severe insomnia and elevated cortisol levels. When asked if he wanted therapy, he shook his head. When offered a legal consultation, he said, "Not yet. There's nothing to say." In the first week, he wrote 17 letters, 11 of them to his mother, Janice Combs. All were emotional, handwritten pleas for a visit. None received a reply. He was granted 2 hours of isolated yard time each day under direct surveillance. No phone, no internet, no contact. All incoming and outgoing mail was reviewed by the prison's intelligence unit. Allenwood does not give special treatment. Even to the most famous inmates, the rules are absolute. On the 4th day, something strange happened. During yard time, Diddy suddenly shouted a phrase in French, "Salut, mon tang," roughly translating to, "It's over, do you hear me?" There was no visible audience, no one in range. The outburst was logged by guards and flagged in a psychological review. One internal theory suggested it was a symptom of power obsession disorder. a mental fracture common in former elite figures who believe they're still commanding unseen followers or enemies. His presence triggered unrest inside the PCU, veteran. Inmates complained of tightened schedules, reduced movement, and constant surveillance. Some whispered that the entire wing had changed. One reportedly said, "It's like the walls know who he is." Whatever remains of Sean Combs behind those sealed doors, whatever he once was, is gone, and what's replacing him may be darker than anyone expected. Witness a man who once lived in unmatched luxury, someone whose face once graced the cover of Forbes, now slumped in the corner of a concrete prison cell. Sean "Diddy" Combs, silent, motionless, no longer commanding rooms or cameras, yet his very presence began to exert a suffocating pressure on the unit. He said nothing, reacted to nothing, but somehow he filled the space like a storm waiting to break. No one knew whether he was plotting quietly or had completely unraveled. Contrary to rumors circulating online, the now infamous bloody video was not evidence of a prison beating or guard brutality. It was the result of a brief, minor altercation. During a transfer between units, an accidental elbow, a stumble. There was no indication Diddy had acted violently, but it was his silence that disturbed people. In an environment where everyone yells to prove they still exist, silence becomes a dangerous kind of power. That silence drew the attention of federal authorities. Though the public had already moved on from the trial's outcome, the FBI had not. Behind closed doors, the Bureau had launched a deeper investigation, not into what Diddy had done, but into what he might still be doing. Could a man once accused of running complex financial crimes and underground operations still be pulling strings from inside a cell? The answer, they suspected, was yes. Leading the operation was Agent Marcus Doyle, a seasoned investigator who had followed Diddy's movements long before the first charges were ever filed. In a classified memo to FBI headquarters, Doyle wrote, "Evidence suggests the defendant previously manipulated old networks in both the music industry and legal sphere to avoid full accountability. It cannot be ruled out that similar manipulations are continuing inside the prison system." In response, the FBI quietly escalated its surveillance efforts. Every phone call, letter, and in-person interaction was flagged. Diddy rarely used his phone privileges, but when he did, it was often to call numbers not registered under his name. More alarming were his repeated use of suspicious phrases like "Project the Bridge" or "Light it up," terms previously flagged in investigations involving offshore accounts, encrypted money transfers, and witness intimidation inside the entertainment industry. The case took a pivotal turn when an unexpected figure stepped forward. Devin "Tank" Hall, Diddy's former bodyguard. Hall had traveled the world at Diddy's side, present at elite galas and private negotiations alike, but following his own arrest in an unrelated matter, Hall offered cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence, and what he revealed reignited the FBI's scrutiny. According to Hall, during attorney meetings held inside the detention center, Diddy would often ask to bring creative reference materials. These weren't song lyrics or business notes, they were ciphered documents, phrases, designed to look like music ideas but in fact acted as encrypted messages for his network on the outside. Diddy, Hall claimed, would write the phrases by hand, hide them inside book covers or legal folders, and pass them to attorneys under the guise of routine paperwork. With a court-issued warrant in hand, agents searched the bag of one of Diddy's private attorneys during a scheduled visit. Inside, buried between pages labeled "Song Ideas," they found a single handwritten page that, at first glance, appeared meaningless. But after running the document through decoding software, analysts uncovered 3 email addresses, a numeric sequence linked to a financial institution, and a cryptic line referencing a fund transfer. Though not yet admissible as definitive proof, the discovery only deepened suspicions that Diddy was attempting to maintain control over operations outside the prison walls. The web, it seemed, hadn't entirely collapsed, only gone underground. For now, these findings haven't triggered new charges or media headlines. But inside bureau halls, there's a growing consensus. Diddy may be down, but he isn't done. A darker question has begun to rise. If he still has influence, who else might be entangled in his network? According to a report filed in late June, the spiral deepened. A former production manager once employed by Diddy was caught on surveillance footage deliberately destroying hard drives at a private office in Los Angeles. The drives were believed to contain financial data tied to intermediary payment routes, some of which reportedly mentioned the names of several prominent artists. While their exact involvement remains unknown, the discovery set off alarms across multiple agencies. The situation intensified further when prosecutors in California proposed reopening investigations into a series of high-profile parties hosted by Diddy between 2019 and 2022. Events that allegedly featured powerful music executives, high-level business elites, and even political figures. In response, the FBI was forced to widen the lens of its operation. Diddy was no longer viewed as a fallen celebrity entangled in personal scandals. He had become a potential centerpiece of a sprawling, largely hidden network that had, for years, existed above the law. During a confidential debriefing, one senior FBI agent was quoted as saying, "There are people who, even while confined to a prison cell, continue to run entire networks from the center. The question isn't whether we can see the structure, it's whether we have the courage to dismantle it." What once looked like a closed case was rapidly becoming something far larger, not because of what had already been proven, but because of what Diddy might still be doing, silently, invisibly, from inside. The days drenched in hostility. Inside the harsh world of the U.S. federal prison system, those convicted of sex-related crimes, especially high-profile individuals, are marked targets. Fame does not protect them. In fact, it makes them more vulnerable. Removed from their former lives, stripped of status and security, they are forced to navigate the brutal hierarchy of incarceration alone. For Diddy, that moment arrived much earlier than expected. At 3:12 p.m. on June 10, 2025, a serious incident occurred. While in the exercise yard of the PCU, Protective Custody Unit, Diddy became the focus of verbal harassment from a group of inmates watching from an adjacent section. According to the official prison incident report, 3 Latino inmates began, loudly taunting him. One approached the fence and shouted, "You monster! You messed with kids! Karma's coming for you!" Diddy remained silent. Head bowed, hands at his sides. He didn't flinch. But the silence only intensified the moment. 1 of the inmates then hurled an object, believed to be a piece of metal, into Diddy's section of the yard. Correctional officers responded immediately, ending the yard session and removing Diddy from the area. Though physically unharmed, he submitted a formal request for immediate transfer, stating, "I have reason to believe my life is in danger." The transfer was approved that same day, but the threats did not end there. A week later, a guard discovered a message written in black charcoal on a restroom wall within the PCU wing. It read simply, "Sean won't survive the winter." Whether it was a legitimate threat or prison graffiti, Allenwood's protocol required maximum precaution. Diddy was moved into full isolation, no contact with other inmates, no shared meals, no overlapping yard time. Only correctional staff were allowed near him. Under this constant pressure, his mental health began to visibly erode. A prison psychologist reported clear signs of psychological collapse. Diddy was plagued by chronics, insomnia, often waking in the night soaked in sweat. He barely spoke, and when he did, his words were fragmented. His eyes stared past people, unfocused, as if searching for something that no longer existed. The psychologist identified the condition as social reality denial, a prolonged form of trauma seen in individuals who once held total power and lost. It overnight. But what truly broke him wasn't an attack or the cell's cement walls. It came from his own blood. A handwritten letter arrived at the prison. It had been mailed from Los Angeles and passed all screening protocols. The sender, Justin Combs, Diddy's eldest son. According to a guard on duty, Diddy read the letter, silently. He held it in his hands for nearly an hour. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. Just stared. Then, without a word, he folded it carefully, slid it under his pillow, and lay down. He skipped dinner that night. The next morning, he refused to come out for yard time. For the next 3 days, he said nothing, ate nothing, and did not respond to the doctor who came to check on him. A special report issued shortly after summarized it in one chilling sentence. Inmate exhibits signs of rapid psychological decline, marked by sustained silence, food refusal, and dissociative behavior. In the eyes of the prison staff, the powerful man who once dominated global headlines now seemed to be vanishing before them, one quiet, unspoken day at a time. Diddy was officially diagnosed with severe depression and placed under close psychological monitoring. Despite this, he refused all treatment. On a rare occasion, when the prison psychologist softly asked, "Do you still know who you are?" Diddy whispered so faintly that only someone right next to him could hear, "I used to be the man no one dared to touch." For someone who once orchestrated million-dollar parties, stood beside presidents, and dominated music charts, the emotional impact of being abandoned by his own son struck harder than any prison sentence. It stripped away everything that had shielded him, his fame, his fortune, his image, and left only a man forced to confront the consequences of his own actions. And, heartbreakingly, this was only the midpoint of what would become a long, unraveling descent. The applause was gone. The stage was empty. There was no one left to impress, no one left to protect him. Just himself, in silence. Yet what followed wasn't just the collapse of a man, it was the collapse of a kingdom. Diddy had become more than a public figure. He was a brand, a machine, a symbol of power and aspiration. His influence reached far, beyond music, into fashion, liquor, reality TV, sports, and media. For decades, he wasn't just part of the industry. He was the industry. But when the facade cracked, everything behind it began to rot. On June 6, 2025, following the guilty verdict, the federal prosecutor's office and the Asset Investigation Agency issued a sweeping freeze on all assets registered under the name Sean John Combs and his corporate holdings. The list of seized assets stretched over 27 pages and read like a catalog of extravagance. A waterfront mansion on Star Island in Miami, 2 luxury penthouses in Manhattan, a 13,000-square-foot Beverly Hills estate, a Bugatti Veyron, Rolls-Royce, Ghost, Maybach S680, a private jet, and a multi-million-dollar collection of modern art. Perhaps most notably, a 38% stake in Bad Boy Records, the label that once launched the careers of the notorious B.I.G. and Maze, was frozen. So were silent investments in brands like Ciroc Vodka and Sean John Clothing. The total value of seized assets, based on a preliminary assessment, exceeded $92 million. And that figure did not include funds still moving through offshore accounts. According to forensic investigators, Diddy used a vast network of shell companies to route profits through financial havens such as the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. Several foreign accounts were now under investigation for potential money laundering and tax evasion. In the days that followed, the fallout was immediate and brutal. Brands that once celebrated their association with Diddy raced to distance themselves. The music streaming platform Tidal removed all Diddy-related content within 24 hours. Luxury fashion brands, alcohol sponsors, and media companies began rebranding or canceling anything tied to his name. Even old collaborators began to go silent. The first public crack came from French Montana, a rapper Diddy once mentored. In An explosive interview with 60 Minutes, he said. I saw a lot of wrongdoing, not just once, but back then you couldn't say anything. Around Diddy, silence was the only way to survive. He went on to describe events where young women were brought in under unclear circumstances, where drugs and alcohol flowed freely, and where questions were dangerous. Mary J. Blige posted a video on Instagram, her tone quiet but unmistakable. I wasn't involved, but I won't lie, I heard the rumors. I looked the other way. That was my fault. Her words were a quiet indictment, not just of Diddy, but of an entire culture that enabled him. Investigative reporters dug deeper. Former employees of Bad Boy Records described an atmosphere of absolute control. Dissent wasn't tolerated. Ethics were optional. One anonymous assistant said, "We didn't ask questions. We didn't challenge him. We just did our jobs. That was the rule. Don't interfere." The legal pressure grew. More civil lawsuits followed. After Cassie and Serafina, 3 former employees of Diddy's music label came forward, along with 2 logistics coordinators and a model from his fashion line. Allegations included sexual harassment, abuse of power, coercion, and psychological manipulation. A Los Angeles litigation firm announced it was preparing a class action lawsuit, one that could force the liquidation of Diddy's entire asset portfolio to pay restitution. Outside the courtroom, the business community reeled. Market analysts estimated over $340 million in value vanished within 2 weeks across companies and funds connected to Diddy's name. For investors, he had gone from kingmaker to red flag. His name was now synonymous with instability, scandal, and risk. Social media turned savage. Memes circulated showing Diddy in once iconic poses, wearing fur coats and diamond chains, juxtaposed with stark photos of him behind bars. The fall wasn't just legal, it was cultural. A former icon had become a symbol of unchecked power gone wrong. Inside the prison, it got worse. After learning his bank accounts were frozen, Diddy reportedly sat motionless for 2 hours, clutching a ballpoint pen with no ink. He didn't write a legal appeal, not a letter to his mother, not even a message to his lawyer. He just moved the pen in silence, across air, not a word for anyone to hear. Just the ghost of one man's empire evaporating, and what made it all the more tragic was that it didn't collapse from the outside. No scandal leaked from a hacker, no enemy launched an attack. The empire crumbled from within, under the weight of lies, secrecy, control, and silence. The very structure that once protected him became the cage that trapped him. The next chapter won't be measured in court dates or headlines. It will be measured in what survives when everything else has been stripped away. It was never just about a single man or a list of crimes. It was a reckoning, a statement from the justice system to an entire industry where fame and power once acted like bulletproof armor. On the morning of June 7, 2025, just hours after, the verdict was announced. Judge Eris Thorne delivered the sentence: 42 years in federal prison. No parole. No sentence reduction. No chance of clemency. In a press statement that followed, the judge made it clear, this is not a sentence for a man. This is a sentence for a system, a culture where power, fame, and wealth have hidden even the most horrific acts. Justice cannot be a privilege reserved for the nameless. It must be a truth applied equally, even to those we once idolized. Diddy's defense attorney, Charles Menard, immediately filed for an emergency appeal to the Federal Court of Appeals. It was rejected within the week. The court cited a lack of legal merit and absence of new evidence. That rejection made the 42-year sentence final. At 55 years old, Diddy would remain behind bars until he was at least 90, unless granted a presidential pardon, which remains exceedingly unlikely given the magnitude of his conviction. But the criminal judgment was only the beginning. With the floodgates opened, civil lawsuits began pouring in. Cassie, the first woman to publicly speak out, officially filed for emotional damages and lost income, seeking over $18 million for incidents spanning from 2005 to 2018. Following her, actress Serafina Vance filed a $12 million lawsuit for abuse suffered at a party in Miami, also demanding a formal public apology. By August 2025, 9 separate civil suits had been accepted by courts in California and New York, involving more than 20 plaintiffs, most of them women who had either worked for Diddy or been coerced into attending his events. 3 of the cases were filed anonymously under victim protection laws related to sexual assault. A class action lawsuit is now in preparation, led by Liberty for All, the same feminist legal group that helped convict Harvey Weinstein in 2020. The financial fallout widened. The IRS launched a full-scale investigation into Diddy for suspected tax evasion and fraudulent financial reporting dating back 12 years. Documents obtained during the March 2024 raids revealed millions of dollars funneled into offshore accounts through unreported shell companies. While the evidence hasn't yet led to additional criminal charges, it was sufficient for the IRS to deepen asset freezes, impose sanctions, and initiate a sweeping audit covering his finances from 2010 through 2023. And the ripples didn't stop there. Diddy's sentencing triggered a wider investigation across the entertainment world. An internal FBI memorandum confirmed that over a dozen industry figures, ranging from producers and event organizers to media executives, were now under surveillance or had confidential dossiers opened on them. All were suspected of participating in facilitating, or covering up similar abuses linked to Diddy's long-operating network. But perhaps the most devastating impact was cultural. Hollywood has faced major scandals before: Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein. But Diddy's case struck something deeper. He wasn't just another mogul. He was a symbol, the embodiment of the Black American dream. A man who rose from Harlem streets to billionaire boardrooms, who once stood as a living proof that a Black man could lead empires in music, fashion, media, and business. His fall is more than scandalous. It's historic. Professor Karen Lell, a pop culture expert at UCLA, wrote, "Diddy's downfall is like a fault line ripping through the mirror, or door. Society used to admire its ideals. This isn't just about personal failure. It forces us to question the very system we applauded, one where talent was used as an excuse to forgive everything else." And then, quietly, came the silence from those closest to him. Diddy's mother, Janice Combs, once a proud presence in his public life, has since retreated from the spotlight. A family psychologist confirmed that she is suffering from shock, depression, and temporary memory lapses. No formal statements have come from the family, aside from a legal notice confirming that Janice is in no condition to attend future hearings. The woman who had once been his foundation is now a portrait of irreversible grief. One thing is now undeniable: celebrity no longer guarantees protection from the law. The Diddy case will stand as a landmark moment in entertainment history, where an empire built on fame, influence, and silence collapsed under its own corruption, and where the legal system finally answered a question too long ignored: is anyone above the law? The answer, clear, firm, and resounding, is no. If you believe this story needs to be heard, like, subscribe, and share. We'll keep bringing you the truth, unfiltered, unflinching, and unafraid.